All right. Hello, everyone, one and all. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connery, which with me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Dr. Phil McKenzie. Been a while since I've trod out that old bit. Phil, how's it hanging? The stethoscope, I mean.
Neatly on my doctor's robes. That's what we wear, right?
In the UK, I think, yeah, robes and a wig. And a beaked mask, I think, is still the uniform of the British doctors.
Oh, yes.
Well, today on Heavy Hands, I may have mentioned this last week on the show. In fact, I think I did. We're not going to talk about this next card. Have you looked at it, Phil?
I have, and I'm regretting it.
It's not great, you know. And I even like some of these fighters. Like, I like Carol Hosa a lot. She's in the co-main event, at least as far as I can tell. I think they're still adding things. You know, she's a lot of fun. She's like Hinata Moicano in style, and yet she's fighting Sayara Eubanks. Like, I don't care. Overeem versus Sakai. I don't care. We just can't muster any enthusiasm for that one. So we're going to do a topic instead. Stepping away from this relentless UFC schedule, which we thought would give us a break coming up at the end of October, but nope, they filled it out, and it's just nonstop, breakneck, event after event, presumably till the end of time. So, what we're going to do is first talk a little bit about last weekend's event, which was Aleksander Rakic versus Anthony Smith. We'll talk about Lawler versus Magny, the co-main. I think we'll talk a little bit about the firefight that Ricardo Lamas and Bill Algeo, engaged in. And then after that, we are going to revisit, a topic. Boy, I really should have looked up the episode number. A topic that, the bad doctor, Patrick Wyman, and I discussed on this show ages ago, which is style archetypes. We are going to get into a discussion of, you know, how we can categorize fighters based in their tendencies. Maybe one of my favorite aspects of this discussion is always the sort of personal attributes that inform these styles. I really do believe that you reveal who you are by how you fight. I don't think it's like writing, you know, it's like any form of creative expression. You can't help but reveal yourself in the way that you fight. And what I really want to get into is also how these styles translate, archetypes that I use, which are borrowed / stolen from the language of boxing, how and if those archetypes translate to wrestling and grappling games. If we can say with any certainty that a fighter who prefers a certain type of striking game will also most often prefer a certain type of ground game or a certain type of wrestling offense. So we're going to get into that topic. We're going to delve pretty deeply into it, and most importantly, Phil, we're going to get your perspective, because I don't think we've really talked about this in depth, the two of us. Whereas Pat and I really laid some groundwork for all of our discussions, and we're very much on the same page. I'm hoping I can get a little disagreement out of you. Before we do any of that, though, Smith versus Rakic. Phil, do you feel at all that you betrayed me in particular by convincing me that Aleksander Rakic was Thiago Santos? Because Thiago Santos would never do this.
Thiago Santos has won weird top control decisions before.
Kevin Holland, I guess.
Yep. And did he actually finish what's his face? Huge slow man whose fans hate you? Eric Anders.
His fans don't hate me. They need me. I'm what gets the what's his name again? The Anders army up in the morning.
That was a referee stoppage, I think, after the second round.
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of grappling. It was a lot of Anders, who is not a good wrestler, going for takedowns. I don't think there was a lot of grappling in that one.
I thought Santos did beat him up a fair amount from top position. but I might be misremembering. But yeah, I mean, even in those cases, to be honest, Thiago was laying down ferocious ground and pound.
Always does
the whole time, and yeah, this was very controlling from Rakic.
Yep. There's a certain thing, we talked about how the dynamic, the light heavyweight dynamic was what had been so forgiving to Anthony Smith, and that his core style really had not changed. The same faults were there, and just light heavyweights were less capable of exploiting them. I think even here, in a performance that he lost incredibly one-sidedly, that bore out. Because, this was like when Jones beat him. He has him just ready to go for 4 rounds. Right on the cusp of, totally collapsing. And I don't know. Do you have an interpretation of why it felt like Rakic just couldn't or wouldn't take that final step? Wouldn't pour it on?
I mean, so there were a couple of occasions when they were on the feet and Smith actually cracked him. Because as we said, Rakic is not really anything to go by defensively.
And Smith is always offensively potent.
Yeah, and other than that, I think it's just a question of cage craft. Like we said, he tends to get backed up into the cage the whole time.
Yeah. He
did that in this fight, even from a one-legged Anthony Smith, and he just couldn't stop the clinch exchanges from coming.
Yeah. But he kept winning.
It was interesting. Yeah, exactly. It was interesting though, because I remember really Luke Thomas's tweet before the fight itself, where he was discussing that Rakic has a really good deadlift. He's just a surprisingly incredibly strong man. And that never been something which hugely jumped out to me when I was watching his fights. Perhaps it was something that should have done. But with this, it definitely was.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these takedowns were just... I mean, they weren't even credited as takedowns. He just threw him out of the clinch several times. I don't think Fight Metric actually attributed a single actual takedown to him.
Yeah, he was purely hulking his way through things in a sort of very early Mark Jacasey way. And yeah, I mean, I think it was just one of those ones where there was a hidden, the hidden contract signed between the two fighters, I think. Much as it was in the Jones fight, Smith was like, you don't hurt me too bad, I won't fight back too much.
Yeah.
And probably makes sense for him. If he'd fought back to the feet, he probably would have got it looked like he was going to get TKO'd by low kicks, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of damage to soak up in a relatively short amount of time.
That's at least a little more forgiving interpretation for Rakic, which I don't disagree with. Smith was himself quite content to allow this sort of crawling pace on the ground because it was preferable to whatever else was happening in the brief moments they were elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it would be more concerning for Rakic because it shows that he's atrociously unable to stop the clinch from happening.
Yeah.
If it's in his best interests. It would be more concerning if light heavyweight was better, and I could think if there were any fighters where that might make a difference now that DC is gone and Glover Teixeira is 1 million years old.
Yep. I was just thinking, if only Mark Jacasey were lucky enough to weigh 220 pounds. He'd be great. He'd be an amazing light heavyweight. Oh my God. That much athleticism. He would have been perfect as the Jacasey that came to the UFC. Just a big athletic Hulk. Yep.
Yeah,
well,
so it's really hard to think of an archetype in the upper part of this division where that would actually trouble him. I mean, right. I guess maybe the only ones I can think of are maybe Sirkunov and Ankalaev, but both of them, Sirkunov has the major problem of being not particularly durable.
Yeah.
And Ankalaev, I don't know. I mean, he seems happy to fight at range, to be honest. I'm not sure if he would take a relentless clinch game against against Rakic. But yeah, as with Jacuzzi, it's probably something that could be undone by concerted pressure and or just better grapplers and better clinch fighters, but they don't really exist at this weight class.
Yeah. Even just better pressure on the feet. Like you talked about those few moments where Smith was connecting. It was largely Rakic backing himself into the fence and no feints, no head movement, no playing with distance or just waiting for the counter and then swinging more and harder and faster than Smith, even when he got hit. Which, is basically what we said last week, was what made him so much like Thiago Santos. And I do think that comparison also bore out in the brief moments that it was on the feet. I believe we did characterize him as Thiago Santos with RDA's personality. So,
yep.
It was essentially a what if Thiago Santos but boring type of performance. Great win for Rakic. We loved it. Fantastic end to an event. Please make heavyweights and light heavyweights the main event of every event, UFC. Never gets old.
Can't get enough.
It never gets old. Okay, well, let's talk about the co-main event. This one, probably far more demoralizing, although, I like Neil Magny. And I was fully emotionally prepared for this moment. Sometimes it bites us in the ass, Phil, when we're totally dismissive of an aging fighter in a prediction, and then they still reveal that they are what made them great. Nope. It was 100% Magny's fight. There were maybe 3 moments spread out over those 3 rounds. 3 moments lasting no more than 10 seconds apiece, in which Lawler seemed like he might have an opportunity to win a round. And he didn't win any of them. He lost every single round very clearly. He fought a very poor fight. And that contrasted with the fact that, as we noted, Magny has genuinely gotten better. His striking is so much better than it used to be. The jab is beautiful. And, his entire game just functions a lot more smoothly than it ever did before. And so where Lawler completely shit the bed, Neil Magny was pretty perfect, honestly. It was a great showing.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those ones where, as fighters age out, they can, I think we saw with Jan Aldo, and I think Aldo is obviously less, I would say it is actually a good deal less deteriorated than Lawler at this stage, but is also obviously a better fighter. But you can basically see that they can have bad style they can have against good style matchups. They can win or compete even at the elite level, going for quite some time. But this was a sort of, I think if this had happened in Lawler's prime, it is a fight that he probably would have won, because he would have had huge explosions of violence at one point that would allow him to steal rounds which had been largely control.
Yeah.
I mean, as you said, they sort of happened in this fight. They just weren't anything like enough to steal rounds anymore.
Yep.
Or he would have just finished Magny. But he didn't have the approach he never really has had the approach that would have reliably won him rounds in this fight to the extent that you would have been like, oh man, Lawler just has Magny's number.
No, it always would have been a fight where he would have dropped a round on inactivity.
Yeah. As we said, you need to be able to pressure Neil Magny. Lawler he's not really a pressure fighter. He's a mid-range. He's sort of a mid-range, responsive fighter at his best. And him trying to be aggressive puts him into the clinch, which was okay against Donald Cerrone, and it definitely wasn't okay against Neil Magny.
Which does, underscores how good Magny's clinch game really is. How smothering and frustrating, because Lawler is a good clinch fighter. He arguably beat Matt Brown in the clinch, in their fights, and beat Cerrone, who is himself not a bad clinch striker. Magny just has the style he uses with his frame, that body lock underhook based style as a 6'9" welterweight is really, really effective. And as long as Lawler was not attacking his grips and peeling off the body lock and the rear waist cinch, Magny could take his sweet time, slowly working on a way to drag him to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And also,
and even if Magny was giving up strikes when in those clinch situations, it just didn't matter because he was building up a lead in terms of cardio and control and in terms of frustration.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we've seen Robbie Lawler frustrated by wrestlers before. This was a classic sort of loss for Robbie Lawler. The look on his face was one that we've seen many times before. I want to give credit to Magny as well, though, for understanding that dynamic that Lawler was struggling under. The fact that he in order to win, he had to be aggressive, and being aggressive would lead him into clinch range. Like, Magny really knew that. It was, as I think Paul Felder said a couple of times on the commentary, it was a very good all the way in or all the way out performance. He was either at his range where he could touch with the jab and the right hand, and the front kick, a lot of really great front kicks from him that where Lawler couldn't respond, or when he did get cornered and Lawler was loading up and charging up and getting ready for that burst of violence, to just slip and step right into the clinch. Over and over, rinse and repeat, and it was perfect. I mean, he took a couple of cuffing shots in those transitions, but as we also said last week, Magny, very underrated durability. The guy is super tough. And his style looks, I think, a lot more durable even than it did before. He has better answers, better footwork, a better ability to counter. He's always done the sort of like a weird flicky jab thing to set up the right hand, but I love the fact that it is now an actual jab. There were a lot of situations where Lawler would be pressuring, he'd be trying to do his head movement, and Magny would just use these really light, totally non-committal jabs to find his head, land a good shot, and get himself off the fence. It was great. But, you know, I don't even think, I don't want there to be any illusions about who Neil Magny is, just because he's gotten better. He's papered over some of the holes in his game. But it wouldn't even just take a prime Robbie Lawler, I think, to find those holes. It could be anyone with a more insistent pressuring style that actually allows them to maintain their own ideal distance. Because there are a lot of moments in this where Magny was fully committed to the retreat, was just circling along the cage, lots of opportunities for somebody who is more active with their feints, more aggressive with their footwork, to just touch him a million times as he's trying to get back to safety. So, the good and the bad.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so, I mean, with Neil Magny, there's the problem that the fights that he has lost in the UFC have traditionally not been the kind of, oh, you just need to change one or two things and this would have gone different for you.
Yeah.
They have been absolute horrific blowouts.
Yep.
The Ponzinibbio fight, the RDA fight, the Maya fight, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Larkin. Like, if someone solves him, he is absolutely toast.
Yep.
But, as the, but as it goes, he's sort of either he's just sort of outlasted a lot of those poor matchups.
Yeah.
That they're just no longer in the UFC, or they're aging out. RDA is gone. RDA has gone back down to lightweight, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Damian Maia is, aging out. Probably isn't, whatever his last few fights are going to be, none of them are going to involve Neil Magny. Gilbert Burns thankfully went straight past Neil Magny.
Mm-hmm.
Because he would have been a horrific matchup for him.
Right.
The person that he just needs to make sure that he never fights Vicente Luque.
Yep. Yes, he really does. I don't think he has quite enough Stephen Thompson in him for that. He can only do it for 20 seconds at a time. And then he gets a little tired of being aggressive, even off the back foot. I guess
I think the best, I think the best, I wouldn't mind seeing sort of a midway matchup between like one of the horrors, like Luque, and someone who would just be tricky but winnable.
How about
I wouldn't mind seeing
Barberena versus Magny instead of Luque. Just
I think that would work.
Slightly less potent, but no less relentless version of Luque.
I'd also like to see, I'd like to see one of the Cowboys.
Ooh, man, Magny versus Oliveira could be a very strange and potentially exceedingly ugly fight.
Mm-hmm.
But interesting. I like it.
Because it'd be one of those ones where if Cowboy decided to like front kick and low kick him, out physical and just beat him up, it could be really bad for Magny. But then on the other hand, can Oliveira really stop himself from going into the clinch? And also, does he now think that he's a really good outside striker? I think that would be a fun one.
Mm-hmm. Also, I like Cerrone versus Magny too. Just picturing it sounds like fun. The final word on this fight, and then we'll move on. We'll probably take a segment break. We'll come back. We'll hit a little bit of Lamas Algio and then get into our topic. But I just want to give a shout to Magny's mat wrestling. I've been doing a lot of scouting of grapplers lately, so I have been honing my eye for this phase of the game. And Magny's game on the ground is both very much in line with the sort of MMA wrestle grappling meta as defined by Khabib, but it is also unique to him and his frame. And he just did a fantastic job. I loved the power half Nelson he kept going for to just smash Robbie Lawler's posture. Really effective, not only just to wear Lawler out, but as a really slick transition to the Darce. That was cool. I loved the way he would allow Robbie to get to like these posted positions against the cage and literally just sit on the back of one of his legs in like a triangled position. And for Neil Magny, pretty Khabib-esque in that he was landing some quality strikes from these control positions. It was a pretty aggressive ground performance, a pretty damaging one for Neil Magny. And I guess he's always had decent ground and pound, but I feel like this is the first time I've seen it in those sorts of positions. And this is a different Robbie Lawler, but if you compare how dominant Magny was on the ground, the positions that he preferred, and how well he did in them, to say Lawler's fight back in the day with Josh Koscheck, where, he was using that butterfly guard and constantly keeping Koscheck off balance, and he didn't get off his back, but Koscheck was never able to advance or get anything done. It was night and day. Magny was constantly advancing position, constantly keeping the pressure on, and doing damage the whole time. It's good shit. I mean, I like I said, I was sad for Robbie Lawler, whom of course I love, but I also like Neil Magny a lot, and watching him dominate someone is surprisingly fun.
Yeah, like I've always enjoyed Magny's game when it's working. It just looks incredibly broken when it doesn't. But yeah, and I think, this was a matchup which I think Lawler had to be on point to win, and he isn't. I still think there's winnable matchups out there for him. We talked about, on Twitter, you mentioned that how evil it would be to have Mike Perry versus Robbie Lawler. I feel like that's a matchup that I would probably still favor Lawler to win at this stage.
He would certainly be forced to exchange, so that would automatically be a better chance of winning, but also a better chance of getting clobbered.
Yeah, I think it would be. I would put it similar to Lewis versus Hunt, like someone who's actually, who relies a lot on power and fear of that power to make their game work.
An intimidation
against someone
style.
who doesn't feel those things.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Perry's all about that intimidation. When Perry steps into the cage and unleashes that sort of terror bird style squawk, you're in trouble. You know the power is coming for you. Yeah, I mean it would be a fantastically thrilling fight, but I think as you pointed out in response to that comment, you predicted when Mike Perry first came to the UFC that his destiny would be to finally end the career of a faded Robbie Lawler. And
I also mentioned Carlos Condit, but hopefully Carlos is going to get out before that happens.
I think so. I think Carlos probably made it. I think that Neil Magny fight ended the hopes of that action matchup ever happening. But yeah, I know the extent of your clairvoyant powers, so I am waiting for the day. I know in my bones that Mike Perry is going to knock out Robbie Lawler, and it's essentially your fault. So on that note, let's take a break. When we come back, Ricardo Lamas, another fading great, but still able to turn in a fantastic gatekeeping performance against promotional newcomer Bill Algeo. And then on to a discussion of style archetypes and their general application to the broad range of possibilities that is MMA. After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, well, should we get in and then we'll dive into the do we want to figure out how we're going to frame this style discussion, or should we just kind of run with it?
Let's just kind of run. So, I mean, I guess... I mean, the way I was thinking of it is that I've mentioned this before, but I sort of think of people on a few dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to think about, what kind of fighter are they in terms of, whether they're a pressure or an out fighter or whatever. But I also just, as we've sort of discussed with people like, Cheeto, think about what kind of person they are.
Yeah. And to me, I think of those as...
what are you doing it for?
I think of those as different facets of the same core thing. I think of what style of fighting you prefer is almost always in some way a reflection of your personality. And I think
that's true, but I don't necessarily... I think, you can be an insecure outfighter.
Sure.
Like Anthony Smith. Or you can be an insecure pressure
Well,
fighter.
I think most fighters, I should say, are insecure. I think those insecurities reveal themselves in the style. Like, I think a lot of counterpunchers, for example, are, I've talked about patience being defining characteristic, but I also think a lot of counterpunchers, and this is why they produce really awful fights when they fight each other, are anxious about putting themselves out there, about being the first to go. And because,
I agree. Juan Manuel Marquez is a coward.
But I think not cowardice. He's a son of a bitch.
He's a coward.
I won't stand for this.
Scared of getting hit.
I won't stand for this. But I think they feel that when they go first, they feel vulnerable, and obviously people react to that in different ways. And this leads to all sorts of different, sub styles. Marquez is very different from a lot of other counterpunchers. But I think he marries that with the sort of brawler style of insecurity, which is, I'm going to pretend I'm not insecure by going to fucking war. But I think, that insecurity is reflected in what they choose to do to their opponent. Your understanding of what is effective for you offensively frequently comes from the kind of stuff you feel would work against you. Which is why pressure fighters often crumble under pressure, and counterpunchers lose on volume, when they get put in a situation where they need to lead. They just can't make themselves do it, because the thing they do well is exactly the thing they fear being done to them.
I still think there are definitely elements of psychology which don't necessarily map to style archetypes. Like I said, I think one of the things I think about, Lionheart is people who just need, because there's something there are So like for sort of psychological groups that people put into, like 4 of the ones I tend to sort of think of, there are fighters, people who just enjoy fighting. There's competitors who want to win. There's sort of innovators who want to try things out.
Mm-hmm. Want to show
and then
off.
There's Lionhearts, and then there's Lionhearts who are like, for which something is just, for which things are just, it's some kind of essential therapy that they need to work out.
Yeah.
And generally the people are a mix of at least 2 of them. Like I would classify GSP as the fairly rare competitor Lionheart blend with a bit of innovator. But like, if you're just a fighter and you just enjoy fighting, the problem is that you just tend to be a sort of early career Jorge Masvidal, where you don't actually ever win. Well, you just give away fights. Competitors, the problem is that they can be a bit fragile when they stop winning, like they don't have the love of the fight to bring them back into it.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Robbie Lawler in that way a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Robbie Lawler is someone who just fucking loves to fight, but
you can get frustrated or bored out of winning the fight.
Yeah, I'd say like Johnny Hendricks is a competitor.
Oh yeah.
He only wants to win.
Big time.
But doesn't actually enjoy fighting that much.
I often get that sense about Matt Hughes as well.
Yes.
Be a little
I think a lot of wrestling transfers.
Yeah.
Like they're just fundamentally competitive. And
yeah,
they just
that makes sense.
And it means that you're good at cheating if you're a competitor, obviously, because all you care about is winning.
I
think it's.
You know what? It's funny. I think you get that from other people who have long backgrounds in other combat sports too.
Mm-hmm.
Like who have genuinely competed at a high level, like Ioane and Jacek. Very competitive. Yeah. The more you bring it to her, the more she brings it back. Very good at cheating. All of the elements are there.
Yeah, but I think it's also like. It's also the like the reaction to people that people have when they win fights, for example. Like competitors are like, yes, I won, fucking me. And then like Lionhearts are just insanely relieved.
Yes.
They're just like, oh, it's over. I've made it.
So let me think of some other people who have that reaction. Does Frank Mir classify as a Lionheart?
Probably, yeah.
Someone who is notably very anxious and talks openly about how he hates the feeling of preparing for a fight.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I mean, is this our discussion? We might just make this the beginning of our style discussion and come back and revisit Lamas Algio and stick that at the top of the segment. Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, can do.
All right. Well, so what are your 4 categories? This is what I was absolutely hoping for is, me being so up my own ass with my own definitions and just using them as like, default understandings. I know that the reason I wanted you to come on and replace Pat in the first place is that, I would always read your articles and marvel at your sort of psychological understanding of the fighters. I always agreed with your psychological assessment of how a fighter's style functioned. And you also combine that with, of course, having really silly, ridiculous categorizations for these things. But archetypes that really make sense, like your famous, middleweight archetypes. And that these are not just like physical descriptions of people. They often include a bit of that, but they really get at the core of why these people do what they do. And I do think that's ultimately the most important aspect of, the efforts I make to understand how style works. Like there's an element, like when I'm scouting a fighter, there's an element of answering the question how. It's important. How do they do this? Not only in technique, but in tactical application. But I really think the most important thing to understand, if you're preparing for an opponent or just trying to understand a fighter, is to know why they do the things they do.
Yeah,
So.
I think it helps to be able to like determine how people are going to work when fights go deeper as well.
Yes, when they're uncomfortable, when they're like what their instincts are.
Yeah. Yeah, so for like if someone is a competitor, I'm much more, if I see someone as like being a competitor, I'm much more likely to think that they're going to come in and change their approach to someone, for example, than like someone who just enjoys fighting will. You know, I'm sure Robbie Lawler could have low-kicked Neil Magny. I'm sure Robbie Lawler is perfectly capable of physically of playing a functional jab low kick game.
He did it at one point, like mechanically speaking. Magny got turned around on a low kick, and Robbie Lawler countered him with a low kick. It was a really nice moment, and then that was it. It was the only kick he threw, I think.
Yeah. But other than that, he's just going to stick to his own approach.
Right.
But on the other hand, Robbie Lawler was able to sort of break and destroy, like, in many ways, like Johnny Hendricks over the course of 2 fights.
Yeah.
Because you could tell by the end of those fights, Johnny Hendricks just really wanted to win. Mm-hmm. But by the end of those fights, he was just thinking, I don't think I want to win that badly enough that I want to fight this anymore.
Lawler doesn't want to win. He wants to kill and feed. It is a different sort of, it's a different sort of emotional motivation. A different sort of fuel that Robbie Lawler brings into the fight. So so run me through it again. Your categorizations, and we can maybe discuss how these do or don't line up with my own archetypes. Which again, I have stolen from boxing. They are not my own, but please.
So there's actually like 3 broad lenses I look at things through, and I know this is extremely wanky, but that's the first one is just the basic style archetypes that you mentioned. Outfighter, pressure fighter, and so on. The second, my ones were like fighters, people who like fighting, competitors who just want to win. And a tricky one, like, because I'm not sure, is innovators. Because I was trying to think of like notable fighters who didn't fit into my previous categories, but there's guys like Damian Maya. He's not really a competitor, and he's not a fighter, and he's not a Lionheart.
Mm-hmm.
But all he wants to do is he just wants to prove that his style of jiu-jitsu is great.
He's almost defined by a commitment to creative problem solving. Like, that's what he enjoys about fighting.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's sort of an offshoot of the fighting thing. Because he's just like, in the same way as Robbie Lawler, Damian Maya is just like, I want to fight in this way.
Yeah.
It's just a much less, like, violent and, but that's the thing, there's a lot of, there is, essentially there is a lot of blur between them, and everyone is at least one of the two. Otherwise, everyone is at least 2 of the 4. Otherwise, you'd be insane.
Because how you can tell
Lionhearts who sort of have.
Go on.
Who Lionhearts are the kind of people who fight because they have to, because it's some kind of hidden therapy.
Yeah, there's something they're not trying to solve an opponent. They are trying to solve themselves. That is why they fight.
Yeah. So for me, those are sort of the bottom level.
Mm-hmm.
And then the basic boxing archetypes are sort of the level above that, because that's how that gets translated into movement and space.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the top, I think it's then, obviously everything relates to each other. It's then, how do they go about achieving that goal? Because I think it generally, you get biases, but it's not necessarily the entirety of, it's not necessarily like a one-to-one mapping. Like we were saying, like Manuel Marquez is an extremely aggressive counterpunching thing with, but I think the general thing is like, do people want to win exchanges? Do they want to enforce control positions, or are they looking for finishes? Because like someone like,
this is like the cheese block. Remember that?
Michael Bisping. Yeah, exactly. It is the cheese block.
I'll have to link that in the episode. Let me make a note. Like people need to see that if they haven't seen it already. It's actually a genuinely useful, if exceedingly wanky tool.
But yeah, like, you know, you get someone like Michael Bisping or Floyd Mayweather, all they want to do is win as many exchanges as possible. You get other people who want to force their opponents into checkmate positions. Like, they just want to make the place that the other person is in as bad as possible. And you've got other people who just want to finish. They're just like, the only way I see fights ending is by me polishing the other guy off. So yeah, those are the sort of three basic lenses I look at fights through, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I use, so just to recap, oh good, I found the cheese block on an old Sherdog forum post. When was this posted? 2015. Boy, it feels like a lifetime ago. So yeah, my basic archetypes, for those who aren't aware, for those who haven't heard Zane Simon make fun of me a million times by now by saying something along the lines of, he's more of a boxer puncher. My basic archetypes are, pressure fighter, counter fighter, out fighter, and, brawler. And then I sort of have, all-rounder as like the mythical apex, the ultimate union of all these styles. Because like you said, and like anything we try to fit into rigid classifications, fighting style is really a combination of a series of spectrums, of sliding scales, where a lot of the pieces can mix and match. It's like, because it is essentially an armchair, psychoanalysis, it works much the same way as, say, diagnosing someone with a mental disorder. You know, if you were going to diagnose me with ADHD, which no one would ever do that. Certainly not a doctor not a doctor when I was 14 years old. You know, you would fit I would have to fit a certain number of a series of symptoms. And there are many people who maybe don't quite meet that threshold who exhibit 4 of the necessary 5 or 6 symptoms or whatever. You know, in a way that all personality disorders are sort of just like things that everyone does, but blown out of proportion. Fighting styles are like that. Like, obviously anyone who's good at fighting should know how to counter. No matter what their style is, they should be able to land effective counters. They should be able to get hit or make the person miss and then hit them back. And if you can't do that, you're probably just not good at fighting no matter what your style is. It doesn't mean that your style is defined by your counterpunching though. So anyway, those are my 4 basic styles and my 5th sort of half classification. But I also use other lenses. You know, I, for example, I will often talk about whether someone is a doer or a thinker. And I think that sort of overlaps with, whether somebody is a rote or organic fighter. I think.
Yep.
And it doesn't really match up 1-to-1, because I can think of people that I would probably describe as doers who don't do a lot of deep thinking, who are still very rote. And I can think of people who are doers who just go in there and perform and they take whatever the coach tells them to do and run with it, who are super organic. But you know, these are other dynamics that sort of shade my style classifications. But what, at the end of the day, like you, I use the style archetypes I do because I think they describe the why, of a person's approach to fighting. I think they, in my experience, fairly accurately, explain some of the like mental drivers that go into a fighting style. And, yeah, like I said before, to me, I think that's of the utmost importance. And so if that's true, this is what I really want to do is we can do this with both of our categorizations. And I think yours is probably feels more native to MMA. Mine are transplanted from boxing, as I've said a couple times. So yours map, I think, probably very easily onto the totality of an MMA fighter's game. What I want to see is if you can poke holes in how my classifications may or may not extend to non-boxing adjacent aspects of MMA. If it is possible to be a boxer puncher, and that's the style I didn't mention. Shit, I forgot I have a sixth half style and then boxer puncher, which is also,
I was gonna think it's your favorite one.
It's always the one I reach for when I don't know how else to describe someone. I want to see if it's possible to translate those to other aspects of MMA.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
So, yeah, let me get started with somebody that I have watched a good bit of recently, which is Bryce Mitchell. Thug Nasty, famous for being obsessed with having Reebok make him camouflage shorts, and also drilling his own nutsack. And I do not mean getting hit there. I mean taking a drill to his scrotum. So Bryce Mitchell to me is a pressure fighter. And you said what was your level above the sort of the ones that are equivalent to my style archetypes? Like the level, the most granular level?
Yeah. Exchanges, controls, or is it, do you want to win exchanges, do you want to enforce control, or do you want to finish?
Yeah. So for me, mine does not follow those exact lines. Mine is more, I think more just purely descriptive of the tactics being used, but I also have a lot of subcategories that I think of. Like for me, pressure fighters often break down into aggressive counterpunchers, or swarmers. And outfighters can break down into, what I might call pepperers and neutralizers. You know what I mean? There's a difference between say, Ioane and Jacek and, I don't know, Neil Magny. But I would call them both outfighters.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So let's say Bryce Mitchell to me is a pressure fighter, and beyond that level, I think he's an aggressive counterpuncher. He's actually a pretty damn good counterpuncher. I was kind of surprised by that when I first started looking at his footage, because I just think of him as this incredibly dynamic, never-ending momentum ground fighter. But he lands good counterpunches. He's got a really nice, smooth, effortless, straight left hand, that he walks people into a lot. He can do a really good backstep uppercut counter. I've seen him land it clean on several people. A lot of these things, he's constantly going for that Luke Rockhold step back hook, that fadeaway hook. He relies a lot on his counterpunches, but because he's a pressure fighter, they're not nearly as effective unless he's pressuring. That is really the base at which he feels comfortable using those counters, because he has the initiative. That's his way of seizing the initiative. And some people do it off the back foot, but Bryce Mitchell does not. He's a pressure fighter. And the thing I started noticing and watching him recently is that, I think this translates to his wrestling and grappling game. Because on the ground, he doesn't fight the same way as, say, Khabib, even though he uses a lot of the same tactics. As I said with Magny before, this is sort of the grappling and wrestling meta in MMA right now. A lot of the same riding positions, uses a fence in a similar way. His approach is drastically different in that he is keeping on intense pressure in, positions of
deliberately incomplete control. He's not a swarmer on the feet who runs someone to the corner and traps them there and just keeps pouring it on. He's going to let them maybe step out to the side so he can walk him into a head kick, or he's going to get to a range where he just slow cooks them into maybe overextending and reaching for him so he can land his counter. And likewise on the ground, there's a lot of, for example, like 3/4 mount is a position he loves because it allows him to go between back control and something that is like a mount, but somehow more difficult to turn back into half guard. Or, for example, he likes to combine that position with like a half arm triangle. That's sort of a staging position for him, where it's a seatbelt if you turn around, which then leads into the twister that he loves so much. It's also a straight up arm triangle when you're on your back, and he can force you one way or the other because he allows you a path of escape. It's a cultivated line of escape. It's the one he wants you to have, but he is not a lockdown pressure fighter who keeps you flat on your back and rides you out. Nor is he, I think, and Khabib to me is a little more like that. He's more locking you in a given position, super tight control, and then just smashing you. And likewise, his wrestling game is like that of more of a swarming pressure fighter. It's constant, layered attacks. The volume of wrestling threats you have to deal with is really what overwhelms people. So to me, they're both pressure fighters, both standing and on the ground, but there is a genuine difference in their styles, and I think that difference lines up in certain ways with what they do on the feet, which is the phase that my style archetypes, actually describe. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, because, as we mentioned, you can people have underlying biases for what they want to achieve. Like, in these fights, I think, Khabib is looking, as many pressure fighters do, to just worsen your position.
Yeah.
And he's looking for attrition to do this. And I think he's similar in that way, in not necessarily in his technical application,
mm-hmm.
but in the way he fights. He is similar to Cain Velasquez in that way,
mm-hmm.
because Cain Velasquez really chip away at his opponent until they would do so. He would take every small advantage that he had to push people into worse and worse positions. Whereas I think, someone like Mitchell has more of a jiu-jitsu informed approach, where he is essentially looking to finish. It's not necessarily always going to happen, Charles Rosa and so on.
Yeah.
But what he's looking for is positions and finish techniques. It's merely a question of
it's a series of threats. From every position, there is a very clearly implied threat.
Mm-hmm. And it's his end goal is not to sort of keep wearing you down and make it impossible for you to win.
Yeah.
It's that he wants to put you into complete checkmate positions and finish you off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with that.
And I think that's the same is true of the way that he fights on the feet. And I think, as you mentioned, that's something which really struck me as well, because when he was fighting, I think it was against Rosa, I was thinking,
mm-hmm.
this is going to be quite troubling for this guy, because he is just, as you thought, I thought of him just as a very aggressive grappler.
Mm-hmm.
And Rosa's a really frustrating person to fight on the feet, as Shane Burgos found out.
Yep.
And instead, he just looked really clean but also clean in not like a let's say, who was Hick Diaz?
Jason Knight.
His name for a moment. Jason Knight. As opposed to him when he was still full of confidence, where he would just
mm-hmm.
try and bang people out until they would grab with him. we saw a lot more kind of careful work from Bryce Mitchell, and it was a lot more drawing Rosa into counterpunches, which is genuinely pretty tricky to do.
Pressuring into traps, rather than the pressure is like not the ultimate goal. It's the traps that he is setting up with that pressure. Yeah. So let's think of your archetypes for a second. Can you think are there any examples that jump to mind of, that we haven't already mentioned? We talked a little bit about Johnny Hendricks and so on as a competitor. Who's like a good example of an archetype that in your mind, that translates wholly to their ground game? How can you sum up a fighter in such a way that like you get you sum them up with an archetype or a classification?
I mean, I guess the classic, like, I guess the classic, like, finish, but for that particular layer, I mean, if you wanted to sum one up, if you sum someone up, if finish-oriented, innovating outfighter, you would be like, it's Anthony Pettis. He just wants to try out new stuff. He doesn't have much of a round-winning process at all, and every one of his approaches was just like specifically, in his prime. Everything was about drawing people into the finish, whether it was on the feet or on the ground. So
our finisher and innovator on the same level? Is it possible to be part of both? Is that are you comfortable with having people sort of bridge the gap between those two styles?
Yeah, I think you can probably. Yeah, I think you could probably have, out of the three lenses, I think you could probably have all three of them. I mean, RDA is someone who I think is, again, at his best, he's a competitor, who wants to, he's always trying to enforce control positions, and he's a pressure fighter. That every part of his game was forcing you into worse positions.
I think I agree. I think could.
It wasn't necessarily that he was just wearing you down.
Yeah.
Sorry, what's that?
No, I think you could do that with mine as well. I think like that's how my substyles operate. If I think about it, like if I break pressure fighters down into either aggressive counterpunchers or swarmers, then a swarmer is someone who has 1 foot in the pressure fighting camp and 1 in the brawling camp, probably, and an aggressive counterpuncher obviously has 1 foot in pressure and 1 foot in counterfighting. So yeah, I think mine works the same way. There's some space between where people can reside. All right, so.
But yeah, like, I mean, there's still some like very strange examples out there, like Darren Till. What would you classify Darren Till as? Because he's not he is really difficult to put into a because I mean I think he's finish oriented. He's terrible at enforcing control or winning exchanges.
Yeah.
But is he an outfighter? Is he a boxer puncher?
Yeah, I would put him, if I had to, I would like, if I do think of those sub styles as bridges from one style to another, I don't really have one for the bridge between, he's like a connection between two sub styles, which is, he's pressure fighter in my mind. He's definitely way better when he's coming forward, way more comfortable.
Yeah.
That's his home. But, the low output that convinces some people that he's an aggressive counterpuncher, it doesn't actually lead to many counterpunches, as we've noted many times. So he's sort of a, whatever the crossbreed is between a pressure fighter and a neutralizing outfighter. It's like he's just like two steps along the path to aggressive counterpuncher without really that final step. But I wonder too, I mean, there is some crossover where technical development does. I don't think that is I don't think that's the basis of style. I do think that personality is always the basis of style. But technical development can alter how that style is reflected. Like, for example, brawlers, in my mind, are the style that is most frequently moved away from. It's one of the easiest to fall into. It's because everyone's just a basket of roiling insecurities. And for most people who brawl, that's the reason they do it. And so, this is a very optimistic look at the world that fighting has given me, but it suggests that personal change on some level is possible, because I think people do succeed in coping with whatever insecurities lead them to brawl and technically get better and age out of that style. It's happened with Robbie Lawler, Justin Gaethje. You could argue someone like Chito Vera. A lot of people start as brawlers and then they get comfortable and they get better until they become something else.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think you remember. I remember you mentioning it with Pat. Is that the problem with brawler is, and this is why I'm not a big fan of brawler as a style, is that it has. It's the one where there is an implicit lack of skill involved.
Yeah.
Or at least of deliberation.
Yeah. Which sort of touches on...
Because someone gets of better. Yeah, once someone gets better, I think it generally becomes, they drop into like another category pretty much.
Yeah, and that's a bit wishy-washy, because I can recall, for example, an argument I had on Twitter with that son of a bitch, Zane Simon, where he disagreed with me that you could classify Jeremy Stevens as a pressure fighter because his footwork wasn't good enough to maintain pressure against good evaders. So he was like, he's a brawler because he's technically not good enough. And I didn't agree with that. I thought, no, it's in his nature to pressure. He's going to come forward. That's his comfort zone. I just think he's technically deficient. But brawler as a style is frequently defined by technical inefficiency. Like there are people who stay brawlers their entire career. And for whom it is even a comfortable home. Like, I do think there are rare brawlers who aren't even freaking out when they're brawling. They've been doing it so long, it becomes their comfort zone. But yeah, it gets a little fuzzy around the edges when you think about it like that. I don't know.
I mean, who are the best brawlers? Would you classify Mark Hunt and John Lineker as brawlers?
John Lineker, to a degree, yeah. I mean, obviously there's a lot of crossover between him and you could call him also a swarming pressure fighter. But as I already said, I think swarmers are sort of the bridge between those two groups. I would say, like, if I were to dip into boxing, like, Rocky Marciano is probably the greatest brawler of all time. Someone whose style just remained like completely reckless and rough and tumble. And there was a degree of defensive acumen that Marciano doesn't really get enough credit for. But I mean, I think he was kind of a brawler forever. He was brawlers also, I think, if we were to cross it over to your categorizations, are, I think, very finish oriented. And that was Marciano, who would drop round after round after round, relying on the fact that if he could keep the brawl going, he would find a finish at some point. But it's a tough one. And it is one, like I said, I think it's the one people age out of the most. Okay, so let me ask you, or let's try to think, just one more question about the style archetypes I reference so often on this show. Can we think of, let's say, an outfighting ground game? As much as we would agree that outfighting is a style, what are its determining characteristics? And does it reflect in any way, in any consistent way, does it map onto a grappling or wrestling game?
I mean, so what I would generally think of as the classical outfighting game, and this is the kind of Michael Bisping sort of jab pumping
The pepper
style. I would just, I generally think of that from a psychological perspective. It's trying to win the same exchange over and over again.
Yeah. You dictate the exchange, so you always get a safe one.
Yep. And so, I mean, I think in general, like from a top position, I would just consider that to be like conservative functional ground games. I mean, I think probably the most out-fightery ground game is probably GSP. It's just a series of functional tools. He's got like the can opener, the knee slide guard pass, and all he does is he tries to recreate the situations, just tries to win them repeatedly. I mean, occasionally, he has deviated. I think he is someone who really wanted to be. I think he always wanted to be a more diverse fighter than he was, but I think, as I said, I think he was a deeply, in many ways, like an extremely sort of tense and somewhat insecure fighter.
His insecurity was
sort of stopped him from.
His I say all the time, insecurities inform everything a fighter does. His insecurity was in not winning good enough. So, I think you're right. A very cyclical rinse and repeat approach to grappling, but also there were always moments where he was like, "Oh, I'm supposed to be doing more than this. Dana White doesn't like me."
Yeah, like the Dan Hardy fight, for example. He's like, "I'm gonna get an arm bar." But like he just, I mean, GSP just wasn't a great finisher. He never finished anyone who wasn't a career lightweight or deeply mentally fragile.
Yep.
Or physically fragile.
The Jake Shields fight.
I guess Michael Bisping.
Remember GSP the puncher against Jake Shields?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Yes.
Him doing his best impression of Chuck Liddell, and it was not pretty. It did not come naturally to him. But GSP is a tough one. I mean, I would agree. I think
oh God, that was horrible.
To the extent that he is anything, I think he's definitely an outfighter. He's conservative. He's fairly neutralizing. As much as a grappling game translates to a striking game, going in reverse, he's a position over submission fighter. Big time. So yeah, but he is also a tough one because he's so good technically. There's always a temptation to call him an all-rounder. And in fact, it's hard to think of an example of someone who is more of an all-rounder than GSP.
And I think because he was also, he was a competitor at heart. He did what was necessary to win. So, even though his fighting style was typically dictated at range, he wasn't someone who, he was, as we've mentioned many times, he had very good cagecraft, particularly for his era.
Yeah.
Of when it was in his best interest to force people up against the fence, or when it was in his best interest to force the clinch, as in, against BJ Penn. Yeah.
Dictated from range in both of the Josh Koscheck fights, but with very different, strategic approaches.
Yeah. I think of an intersection. I think of what I would consider to be sort of an outfighter's mentality versus a sort of, I'm not sure of a pressure fighter's mentality, I think, but within a sort of finish-oriented pressure fighter's mentality, from a ground fighting perspective, I think is maybe the Jake Shields Damian Maia fight, because Damian Maia is constantly just like, I'm going to get you to the checkmate position of getting to your back, and then I'm going to keep you there and I'm going to choke you out. He's constantly trying to get to checkmate, whereas Shields is just taking pawns. He's just moving to half guard, peppering him with ground and pound. Maia retrieves guard, then he just goes back to half guard again, and the round is gone. He just recreates the same exchange repeatedly.
Can I tell you, I never thought it would be possible for you to create a category which includes Jake Shields, Jorge Masvidal, and Robbie Lawler. But in that extent, would you call them all fighters? They enjoy fighting. They enjoy just responding to the moves given to them and making the next moves. They like the exchanges.
I don't think Jake Shields is a fighter. I think Jake Shields is I think that the thing when he Damian Maya, he was so content to. I think Damian Maya belongs in that category more than because Damian Maya has, like Jorge Masvidal and Robbie Lawler, he has just a deep belief that this is the coolest, best, most awesome way to fight. And Jake Shields was just like, I can win this fight like this. I can win this fight in this ugly ass way of just like, I'm gonna lose position, I'm gonna get it back, gonna land a few more elbows, gonna lose position, I'm gonna get it back. Like.
So is that a competitor style?
I think I think he's a competitor. I think, Maya, he's either an innovator or a fighter. They probably blend a bit. They just want to do their own cool shit in there. And they don't care about, what the other people think. They don't care how the judges think about that, because the judge is probably a loser who doesn't understand how cool it is to, win fights in the way they like.
Oh God. So maybe I would say that, it sounds like competitor, your archetype, is defined by gamesmanship. Like, boy, it sounds like all the most,
a switch, I think. People.
It sounds like all the most annoying people I've ever played. I've ever played Tekken against. Like, I had a friend who would find the one fucking move that I couldn't react to and would exploit the shit out of it. And what was fun for him about playing the game was finding the thing I couldn't react to. There was no interest in mixing it up or having an exchange and trying something new. It was, oh, this works. Rinse and repeat.
But I've played, I've played like myself, and like it's like their reaction to things is just very, very different. So I've encountered like people who I think are competitors in Tekken, played against them, and they just care about they tend to care about things like trophies and just coming first, and like it's their reaction to not just winning, but exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
Cause, Tekken, like MMA, is pretty high variance. Lots of weird things can happen in it. And, not always in a way that anyone is necessarily going to understand. And if something wacky. So there's one guy I can think of who I'd describe as like a competitor. If something weird happens and he comes out on the other end of it, most other people would be like, they would either laugh or they would be like, or they'd be like, oh man, they'd just sort of be taken aback at the fact that they'd just sort of gotten away with this. If it happened to him, he'd just be like, yes! Great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazing. It would be like he's just done that. Because it was the only thing that mattered would be coming out it's just, in the end, it's just like a binary switch.
Yeah. Winning, however circumstantial is very validating.
Yeah. It's just like, if it's on, it's either, it's everything or nothing.
Yeah.
Which I think, it makes for people who are also, I think it's one of the things with long fighting careers, it's one of the things that makes it difficult to balance out the sort of basic nature of being a fighter or a competitor, because fighters struggle to adapt their game plan, whereas competitors often sort of fall out of love with what they're doing once they start racking up losses. So to have a long career where you are both adaptive and, you are tough and in love with the game at all points, to be a Roberto Duran is incredibly rare to find that kind of mix. And I don't think we've ever really seen it in MMA. Yeah.
Especially given that Duran did have the ultimate competitor rage quit moment in his career. And still came back, which is like the fact that he had an incredible, basically another boxer's entire full career after that. It's nuts. Yeah. It shows you like GSP, the really, really great fighters really sort of transcend these definitions, and blur all of the lines. So, okay, well, we're going to go back and have a little discussion of Llamas Algio and then edit that in. But for now, I should tell you that that's basically the end of the show. As you said before, Phil, particularly wanky edition, I think, of Heavy Hands. But that's what this show is for.
Oh, yeah.
These were some heavy hands, and this week they were well lubricated as well. So I always enjoy this, because to me, it's a window into how fighting works. And this is what's so interesting. Like I say over and over, I'm interested in narratives and characters. And the reason I attach to characters in, for example, pieces of fiction is, frequently either development or the struggle to develop. Even characters who don't succeed in changing, can still be totally captivating because their struggle to change is so interesting. And, I think it gets at that level. This discussion gets at that level of how fighting works. Really understanding how people sort of reveal themselves in their approaches to this most violent of games. All right. So anything, that you've read this week, Phil, that you would like to plug for the listeners?
I've been checking out Ed Gallo's article on wrestling's UFC pioneers. He's friend of the show. We've had him on before. And he's written about Dan Severn and Ken Shamrock, and yeah, it's pretty great. It's for QG Digital Publishing, which is, I would guess, like GQ, but the other way around. But yes. That's probably the main thing I'm going to shout out.
Whatever. I wrote a Floyd Mayweather article for Maxim.com once, which is
awesome.
Also like GQ, but worse.
Was this at the? Was this? I remember this. Was this around the Canelo fight?
No, it was Mayweather Pacquiao. It was ranking.
Oh, it was Mayweather Pacquiao.
It was ranking. I actually was really proud of the article. I put a lot of work into it, and they edited the shit out of it and cut a lot of it out. But it was ranking his career's wins from best to worst. So there was a lot of opinion involved, but it was also a ton of a very deep, in its original form, especially a very deep, like 3,000 word long, historical look at his. So if you want to check that out, I should try and republish that somewhere in its entirety. Maybe I can do that on BE.
Yeah, I mean, also, in general, anyone who works on our kind of stuff where you're publishing things on the internet, I think it's always best to keep copies and, like, screen captures and, like, memories of these things, because who knows how long, for example, like Maxim, for example, is going to stay around. And
well, I can tell you, because of changes in management, it took them 8 months to pay me. So I don't know how well that company was doing even at the time that I wrote it. Things seemed a little iffy behind the scenes, but yeah. I also read an Ed Gallo piece that I was going to recommend. I just this morning actually looked at his piece on Darian Cruz. I don't follow collegiate or I don't even know how to call it sometimes, freestyle, folk style, international amateur wrestling that closely. But, it's like going to, like a channel where somebody who knows all about sumo is introducing you to sumo. It's, you are fascinated in it because they understand it and are so passionate about it. That is always how, Ed makes me feel about wrestling. And I already like wrestling more than jiu-jitsu because, jiu-jitsu sucks. So, I was very partial to that article. I like all of Ed's wrestling breakdowns. I do find wrestling actually to be fascinating. I sort of agree with the old sentiment that it is the core, it's the core skill set for MMA. It's probably the one you are best served to invest in, early on. So, he did just a great breakdown basically of an entire season of, Darian Cruz's, wrestling here. So check that out. That one was on Bloody Elbow. Yeah, go on.
Two things, Connor. One, your Maxim piece is in fact still up. I've been looking for it.
Beautiful.
So if you look up Maxim Rebush, you will find both that and the steamy photo shoot you did for them.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned like republishing it on Bloody Elbow. You have already done that.
Oh, it did happen. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Was it in its entirety?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it says at the start of the Bloody Elbow piece, a edited version of this piece was originally published in April 24th, 2015.
Boy, I'm just full of new and fresh ideas, you know.
So check out the Bloody Elbow version.
Yes.
Anyone who's listening to this.
In my opinion, it is. I think writers often feel this way about pieces that get edited, but it's better than the version that was on Maxim. It includes every single fight. The vast majority of them are just listed in order. But then I take, when I come to what I feel is like a key point of development in Mayweather's career, I basically summarize and explain what happened and how Mayweather had changed and what path it set him on going forward. So goes all the way from who's number 47. It was 47 at the time. When it goes all the way from Edgar Ayala to, well, I'll tell you number 2. It's Diego Corrales. So yeah, check that out. I finally have something of my own to plug, from ages and ages ago. All right. Well, that is this week's episode of Heavy Hands. So thank you all so much for listening. Check out all those articles, Ed Gallo's stuff on both Bloody Elbow and QG.com or whatever it was. Just look up just Google him. This is how you find things on the internet these days. And, yeah, we'll be back next week. I think we'll be jumping right back into the UFC schedule. If there's anything worthwhile to break down from this upcoming card, we will, be covering it. And then after that, let me take a quick look. What's happening next? Probably
Santos versus Teixeira.
Oh boy. We're clamoring for more light heavyweight main events. You know, gotta have it.
It's Thiago Santos. It's the real Thiago Santos, so I will will allow it.
He won't let us down. He won't do it. Also, Roosevelt Roberts versus Matt Favola. Sounds like a fun fight on the undercard there. And Ed Herman is fighting. So we will have things to say about that one. I just lost Phil's connection. Oh, he's back. Good thing we're wrapping up. Find us on social media. Phil is at Evil Craig Jackson. You can find me at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, I guess you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
I'll talk to you soon. Good luck breaking down this utter dog shit on the vivisection.
Yep, looking forward to it. It's going to be one of those ones where I just barely look at ahead of time and I'm like, okay, Zane's going to talk about this one first. I'm just going to copy off of his paper.
Yeah, try and learn some of those techniques that, like, bullshit people who pretend to be psychic learn. Where you, like, try and read off what Zane's doing, so you can just not do any research at all. Just be like, yeah, this guy I feel is a and then just see if, like,
no, a corralling pressure fighter. Yeah, it was a C. I'm getting corralling. I like that. I'm getting conservative politics. He has conservative politics.
Yes, let Zane's actual research guide you through.
That's perfect. All right. Well, I would love for this to be the outro, but I think occasionally Zane listens to this show and he can't know. So, all right, man. I'll see you next week.
All right.
Peace. Bye.